We are in serious trouble.
The Mummy is a 1999 American action-adventure film written and directed by Stephen Sommers, starring Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, and Arnold Vosloo as the reanimated mummy. It is a loose remake of the 1932 film. The Mummy follows adventurer and treasure hunter Rick O'Connell as he travels to Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, with librarian Evelyn Carnahan and her older brother Jonathan, where they accidentally awaken Imhotep, a cursed high priest with supernatural powers. Development took years, with multiple screenplays and directors attached. In 1997, Sommers successfully pitched his version of a more adventurous and romantic take on the source material. Filming took place in Morocco and the United Kingdom. The crew endured dehydration, sandstorms, and snakes shooting on location in the Sahara Desert. Industrial light and magic provided many of the visual effects, blending live-action footage and computer-generated imagery to create the titular monster. Jerry Goldsmith composed the orchestral score. The Mummy was theatrically released on May 7, 1999, by Universal Pictures. The film received mixed critical reviews, but grossed $422.5 million worldwide against a production budget of $80 million, becoming the sixth highest-grossing film of 1999. The film started a new franchise with two direct sequels, The Mummy Returns in 2001, and The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor in 2008, and various spin-offs such as an animated series, which ran from 2001 to 2003, and the prequel The Scorpion King in 2002, which led to sequels of its own. In 2017, an attempt was made to start another Universal Monsters franchise with The Mummy. An untitled third direct film sequel is set to be released in 2028. In Thebes, Egypt, 1290 BC, Pharaoh Seti discovers that his high priest Imhotep has been having an affair with his mistress Anksu-Namun. The two kill Seti when he confronts them. Anksu-Namun takes her own life to buy Imhotep time to escape the Medjai, Pharaoh's bodyguards. Imhotep and his priests steal Anksu-Namun's corpse and travel to the city of Hamunaptra to resurrect her, but the Medjai intervene. As punishment, Imhotep's priests are mummified alive, while Imhotep is cursed and buried alive with flesh-eating scarabs. The Medjai are sworn to prevent Imhotep's return, as his resurrection would grant him immense power. In 1926, AD Cairo, Kingdom of Egypt, Jonathan Carnahan presents his sister, Evelyn, a librarian and aspiring Egyptologist working for museum curator Dr. Terence Bay, with an intricate box and map that lead to Hamunaptra, the existence of which is now considered a myth. Jonathan reveals he stole the box from American adventurer and treasure hunter Rick O'Connell, who discovered the city while in the French Foreign Legion 3 years earlier. Evelyn bargains with a corrupt prison warden to free the incarcerated Rick, so he can take them to Hamunaptra, where she hopes to find the Golden Book of Amun-Ra. The group finds themselves competing with an American expedition, guided by Rick's cowardly fellow former legionnaire Beni Gabber. The Magi ambush the expeditions, and their leader Ardith Bey cautions them to leave. Ignoring the warnings, the two expeditions continue to dig through the ruins. The Americans find the Book of the Dead as well as 5 canopic jars, while Evelyn, Rick, and Jonathan accidentally discover Imhotep's mummified remains. That night, Evelyn steals the Book of the Dead from the rival camp, accidentally awakening the mummified Imhotep when she reads the text contained within. Following a confrontation with Imhotep as well as the Magi, the expeditions flee back to Cairo. Imhotep spares Beni's life to serve as a translator when he discovers that Beni can speak Hebrew. Imhotep follows the expeditions back to Cairo and unleashes the biblical plagues of Egypt. Those who discovered the Book of the Dead are hunted and killed by Imhotep, restoring his human form and strengthening his power. Attempting to find answers at the museum, Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan instead find Ardith being hosted by Dr. Bey, revealed to be a fellow Magi. The group surmises that Imhotep desires to resurrect Ankh-Su-Namun using Evelyn as a human sacrifice, and that the only way to stop him is to return to Hamunaptra and find the Book of Amun-Ra. The group are soon cornered by Imhotep and a mind-controlled mob. Evelyn is captured while Dr. Bey sacrifices himself to allow the others to escape. The remaining 3 convince Rick's old friend and pilot Winston Havelock to fly them to Hamunaptra. Imhotep conjures a magical sandstorm, crashing their plane and killing Havelock. Reaching the city on foot, Rick and Jonathan find the Book of Amun-Ra, while Ardith fights Imhotep's resurrected servants. Jonathan and Rick reach the ritual chamber, where Rick frees Evelyn, and Jonathan uses the book to control several guards, ordering them to kill a resurrected Ankh-Su-Namun. Evelyn uses the book to make Imhotep mortal. Rick stabs him, and as Imhotep becomes a mummy once more, he vows that his death is not permanent. Meanwhile, Beni, who had been pilfering treasure from Hamunaptra, inadvertently triggers a booby trap. Rick, Evie, and Jonathan escape the collapsing city while Beni is buried inside and devoured by scarabs. Outside, the group discover Ardith survived, and he bids them farewell as they depart, taking some of Beni's plundered loot with them. Years before they thought up the ill-fated term Dark Universe, Universal Pictures landed on a winning strategy with one of their classic monsters. A heap of CGI, a dash, okay, a lot of Indiana Jones, and all the thrills of a then-modern summer blockbuster resulted in a giant hit with a long-dormant property. With a cast that boasted 2 future Oscar winners and a classic storyline behind all the adventure, The Mummy hit theaters in 1999 like a game changer. It's a formula they would repeat a few more times to continued financial success. Unfortunately, the first installment remains the only one worth watching, but that one still stands as a classic. Boris Karloff played Imhotep in the 1932 version of The Mummy. His mission was very much the same as the character in the 1999 update. His goal to resurrect his long-dead love Ankh-Su-Namun has always stood out as a relatively altruistic one among horror franchises. Of course, hundreds of years' worth of pent-up vengeance, and the destruction brought to anyone in his path muddies that more than a bit. Imhotep is played here by Arnold Vosloo, arguably supplying Universal with its first genuinely memorable monster since the golden age of horror. At least, that is, to the generation of movie-goers who flocked to theaters in May of 1999. Unlike the original, however, Imhotep isn't the star of this story. That spot is given to Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell, a Han Solo type inserted into an Indiana Jones movie. It's all very proto-Mal Reynolds for any Firefly fans out there. It's also incredibly effective. Fraser is at his charismatic best and is well-suited for the role of action hero. He shares the spotlight with Rachel Weisz as Evelyn, the brains of the operation who, like the leading lady in 1932, becomes a key part of Imhotep's plan. The chemistry between the pair makes a lot of the Mummy's pieces fit together. The love story is as basic as it gets. The scoundrel and the bookworm who find they fit together. The Mummy doesn't waste time removing the believe-it-or-not literal glasses from Evelyn's face. Weisz's character is certainly given more to do than the women during the classic Universal Monsters era. She's arguably the lead over Fraser, though it isn't billed that way. It's her arc we are following, even as she ends up the damsel in distress and falls head over heels for O'Connell following a forced kiss. Actually, despite her character being the only one who should know better, she is also the one who unleashes Imhotep and his plagues on the world. Maybe I need to rethink this. O'Connell is a much simpler character. He's there to be charming and adventurous, an action/comedy lead that is believable at both. Fraser is a fit, but there isn't a second level to the role. Evelyn may be harder to pin down, but Weisz imbues her with a level of agency that may not actually be in the script. She is what stands out most about The Mummy 25 years on. The movie doesn't really strive to be anything other than a strong popcorn adventure flick. Weisz does, however. She wills her character to become the most interesting in the mix, even when the script tries to box her in. The CGI holds up better than you'd expect, but it's still very clearly a product of its time. It helps to have a scope that is bigger than the next effect. The Mummy is loaded with spectacles and a sprawling cast to match. You pretty much know who will and won't be making it to the end immediately, but the movie is smart enough to have fun with that. It makes the deaths of expendable characters a part of the plot. Imhotep doesn't show up in The Mummy until surprisingly deep into the story. When he does, his immediate goal is to regenerate himself by killing all the people we already know are fated to die. A small bit of care goes a long way in summer blockbusters. It's easy to be annoyed when a subject you're knowledgeable in is depicted inaccurately on screen. I know medical workers who get annoyed when a procedure is performed in a fatally incorrect manner. IT people who balk at the incessant use of the word firewall and locksmiths who laugh at the way a highly trained secret agent uses lock picks the wrong way round. It sounds obvious, but sometimes we forget the fact that films are simply entertainment for the masses, and in our haste to condemn the inaccuracies, we often overlook the more accurate details. To that end, let us consider the Stephen Sommers directed The Mummy, 1999 film, and observe what the filmmakers actually got right instead of debunking its inaccuracies. The film certainly has some egregious historical inaccuracies. However, the team at Industrial Light and Magic, with the help of Egyptologist Dr. Stuart Tyson Smith, included some surprisingly accurate details, even though they know that the proverbial man on the street wouldn't know a cartouch from a cartonnage. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to cherry-pick a few examples of these, rather than consider every point in the film. The end of the first act sees Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep character being cursed with the Ham die and being mummified alive alongside his priests. Due to ancient Egyptian decorum and secrecy, we don't know exactly how mummification was actually performed. However, through mummy research and experimental archaeology, we do have a good idea of the majority of the processes involved. In the film, we see what appears to be excerebration and wrapping being performed on Imhotep's priests, with some of the embalmers are wearing jackal-headed masks. There are depictions in ancient Egyptian visual culture of masks being used whilst performing rituals like the opening of the mouth ceremony. And there are also extant examples, such as the late-period clay mask in the Romer Pelagius Museum in Hildesheim, or the late-period cartonnage mask in the Royal Pump Room Museum in Harrogate. The wrappings applied to Imhotep look to be very accurate, with a herringbone weave pattern on the torso and strips of outer wrapping encircling the body and legs in the traditional figure 8 style. It's not shown in this scene, but when Imhotep's coffin is later discovered, it's said that the sacred spells have been chiseled off, and that the occupant was condemned not only in this life, but in the next. The spells removed from Imhotep's coffin are likely to reference the Book of the Dead, which acts as a guide for the challenges faced in the afterlife, and was painted on the inside and out of coffins, without which the deceased may find themselves lost in the underworld of Jewat. We're introduced to Rachel Weisz's Evelyn Carnahan character in the library of the Cairo Museum of Antiquities, which has shelves stacked with case-bound books and binders. Those binders are actually imitation field reports by the Egypt Exploration Society, EES, with each binder being for different topics such as art or tools. Interestingly, the EES logo used is actually the original logo of the Egypt Exploration Fund, EEF, with the word fund changed to society. As the film is primarily set in 1926, Having an EEF logo would anachronistic, as the EEF became the EES in 1919. This is an excellent example of a tiny, accurate detail that you ultimately can't even see on screen, but the art department spent time creating it anyway. There is an interesting parallel here with the way much the ancient Egyptian visual culture would never be seen by human eyes other than its creator, and was purely for the consumption of the gods rather than man. When the protagonists leave Giza aboard a riverboat heading for Hamunaptra, we see Evie reading a book during the journey. This is actually The Dwellers on the Nile by E.A. Wallis Budge, published in 1885. Even though his works are not well regarded today, it would be wholly appropriate for Egyptology scholars of the 1920s to be reading Budge. The art department could have used any book, but chose to use something historically accurate which the character would likely have been reading, even though only a tiny handful of people would ever realize the significance. There is exceptional symbolism when we see the camera pan down a carved obelisk depicting Seth, the god of chaos and disorder, and on to Imhotep leading a mob of boil-ridden slaves. As Campbell mentioned in his review of The Mummy, 2017, see post below, even though Seth is the preeminent choice for an evil god, he's surprisingly rarely depicted on screen. Given how much research has gone into the other aspects of the film, this feels a deliberate and appropriate backdrop to the antagonist as he's about to commit another act of violence. There are plenty more examples of accurate and otherwise interesting Egyptological details in both The Mummy, 1999, and also in its sequel, The Mummy Returns, 2001. It can be enjoyable to watch the films and only look at the background, endeavoring to work out what references were used. Some of the origins of those props and sets, especially the ones used for hieroglyphic texts, can be equally surprising and obscure. It's easy to complain about the seemingly endless number of remakes nowadays, but it's not as though it's a new trend. So long as cinema exists, remakes will too, as they have for decades, good and bad. That's not to suggest that every film can or even should be remade, but sometimes there's a film whose ideas, themes, or imagery barely scratched the surface the first time around, leaving behind something for a new filmmaker to come along and find, dust off, and do more with those assets than just merely reassemble them in the same exact fashion as before. Take, for instance, a film like David Cronenberg's The Fly, a distinct classic horror work that people love and respect for what it did within the genre, despite being a remake of the 1958 film with the same name. It took the original's core idea and blossomed into something grotesque and beautiful, offering something wholly new in the process. Compare that to, say, Gus Van Sant's 1998 remake of Alfred Hitchcock's iconic Psycho, an absolute bomb that skipped out on bringing anything innovative to the table in favor of merely recreating Hitchcock's classic shot for shot, resulting in a hollow husk of a film no one asked for, and no one needed. The best remakes take something we know and may even be against seeing remade, and give us something we didn't realize we wanted until we have it. And yet, sometimes, there are things that will never die no matter how many times they are exploited, like the iconic monsters of old that frightened audiences long before characters like Freddy Krueger or the Alien or Michael Myers took center stage. The tales of Dracula, Frankenstein and his monster, the Wolfman, and all the rest have been recounted and reimagined in every way one can possibly think of over the years, to the point it would take something truly unique to have an impact anymore. Though no matter how many times these characters are brought to life all over again, their most iconic cinematic forms will always be tied to the universal horror films. It's really no surprise that in this day and age where the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has motivated studios to chase after ways to see their properties turned into connected universes, Universal has elected to go back to their well of horror icons who once provided the company with their own crossover universe, long before Marvel made it chic to bring them to the modern age. But this isn't, obviously, anything new for the company, who has frequently dabbled with their icons to varying success. Their most notable remake being, of course, 1999's The Mummy. See, I was getting there eventually. The original Boris Karloff-led film released all the way back in 1932. and to this day still drips in dusty, mysterious atmosphere, and its titular character's look is just as unforgettable as that of his contemporaries like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. As with all those films, though, time has changed how effective the Mummy and his cohorts are at striking terror in audiences' hearts. What once caused theatergoers to faint is now humorous in retrospect, as the horror genre itself has evolved in ways that would likely cause those very same people to spontaneously combust. Their influence and impact is undeniable, make no mistake, but to a huge chunk of the modern audience who couldn't care less about such facts, those classic films are boring, and so too have the monsters of old devolved from boogeymen to pussycats in the public eye. Over the years, Universal has tackled bringing characters like the Wolfman and Dracula back to life in an attempt to make them scary again, but to no real avail, which makes their most successful outing yet all the more curious for the fact it clicked with audiences simply as a result of dropping any pretense of being scary. The Mummy has its wonderfully creepy moments, but at its heart, it's an unabashed adventure film, one that owes just as much to the types of pulp serials that inspired the Indiana Jones franchise as it does the film on which it's based, eschewing outright horror for the sake of being fun. In 1999, this didn't work for too many critics, but it succeeded anyway, even spawning its own franchise consisting of 2 direct sequels, an animated series, video games, and an entire spin-off series in The Scorpion King, at odds with so many remakes that fade into obscurity as soon as they've come. The Mummy is, on the surface, anything but a flawless film, one that the self-categorized upper class of the cinema critiquing elite will likely forever look down their nose at simply because it exists, but it's a perfect engine of a movie nonetheless. By now, you undoubtedly know the basic setup. The Egyptian high priest Imhotep, eternally in love with Hamunaptra, is mummified in 1290 BC, leaving behind a curse that states that should he ever be resurrected, he'll bring about the end of the world. And so things go until the 1920s, when he's accidentally brought back and desperate to reunite with his former lover, kicking off the rest of the film in a way that honors the inherent romanticism of the character that existed in the original film, while expanding the scope of the film to make its titular monster more than just a shambling threat. Imhotep here, as played by Arnold Vosloo, is cool and dangerous, and though the audience is never really clued into anything about him beyond his drive to bring back Hamunaptra, the character simply works anyway, imposing more as a monstrous force of nature than as some sort of Machiavellian villain. It's a far cry from Karloff's subdued take on the character who disappeared and quietly camouflaged himself in society after his resurrection, as Imhotep here wastes no time in ensuring people fear him, sucking the life force out of his victims and using all sorts of tricks to demonstrate his power. And for any film that relies on the heavy use of CGI, particularly to bring an entire character to life, time usually tends to not be on its side in terms of the effects aging gracefully. So it's kind of amazing that the CGI work behind Imhotep's initial mummy form still holds up over 17 years later, gifting the film with a monster that still looks great. Of course, other aspects of the CGI work haven't aged as well, like some late-game appearances of Imhotep's lackeys, but they're so trivial that it almost doesn't really matter, as the film embraces the power of practical effects in a way that has paid off for the film's longevity. In a time when blockbuster films overuse their green screens, it's refreshing to revisit a film like The Mummy and revel in actual production design, with amazing sets contributing to the film's epic scale in a way green screens just can't nail down. The Mummy presents a world that feels like one we can reach out and touch, relying on CGI only as a tool, not a crutch, as it should be. This same notion extends to its action sequences. Moments like a car escape through the streets of Cairo, or a daring flight across the desert sands, or the final showdown with Imhotep work so well because they simply feel real. Again, real sets and props and actual extras help breathe life into these moments in a way doing it all against a green screen wouldn't, and the action beats still hold up as a result, especially for their remarkable restraint in knowing when to end or stay relatively grounded. A surprise considering the series went on to feature giant CGI scorpion men and yetis kicking field goals. Those very action scenes are also spaced out well. When they arrive, they're earned, spicing up the proceedings at just the right times. The film runs at just over 2 hours, but never once feels it, as the narrative is paced at such a propulsive speed that never feels sluggish nor breakneck. And just as the film knows when to pump the brakes on its action sequences, it knows when to do away with unnecessary exposition. It's a tightly focused film, particularly once Imhotep has been unleashed, but its main characters never feel slighted as a result, which is another saving grace for the film. Its broad cast is chock full of stereotypes, from the gun-toting, ignorant Americans to the haughty, sexist Englishmen, to its unfortunate portrayal of Arabs as nothing more than punchlines and red shirts. But if you can look past that, the core cast is incredibly endearing. There's Brendan Fraser's indie-esque, charming swashbuckler, Rick O'Connell, Rachel Weisz's proud and intelligent librarian, Evie, John Hannah's slippery but lovable Jonathan, Oded Fayer's stoic badass, Ardith Bay, and Kevin J. O'Connor's delightfully insufferable weasel, Benny. There's an incredible amount of chemistry among the cast, all of whom are clearly in on the fun, a fact that more than works in favor of the film, which never fails to take time to capitalize on their collective charm. From simple scenes of Rick and Evie bonding over drinking to Jonathan and Ardith's differing reactions to being strapped to the wings of a biplane. There's not a whole lot of depth afforded to the characters, but they are the spark that makes the whole thing work, effective not for their complexities, but for the simple fact they're all so likable. On top of all of this, the film has an incredible score by the late Jerry Goldsmith. While I ultimately prefer certain aspects of Alan Silvestri's score for The Mummy Returns, Goldsmith's work here is fantastic, rousing, epic, and romantic in a way that thoroughly enriches the film and feels like an ode to scores of old. It truly is solid work from beginning to end, made even more amazing for the fact that Goldsmith himself allegedly hated the film and having to work on it. Though, as I mentioned earlier, the film does dabble with horror via effective scenes like a creepy sequence in which a character loses their glasses moments before being attacked by Imhotep, or the skin-crawling imagery of what scarabs do to people. It's an adventure film unashamed about what it is. Nearly 2 decades have passed since it came out, and it's still something I can come across on television, turn on and watch straight through to the end, sucked in regardless of whether it's 15 minutes in or 15 minutes from the end. The Mummy is about to undergo yet another reincarnation as part of Universal's bid for their own monster-filled universe. And 20, 50, or 100 years from now, it'll undoubtedly be dug up and remade all over again. Whether any of them work or not remains to be seen, but for me, Stephen Sommers' 1999 stab at the horror icon will remain an enjoyable classic in its own right. It's pulp to the highest degree, but one whose pure entertainment value on all fronts is one that's stuck with me through the years, the type of rare summer blockbuster whose pervasive charms thoroughly outweighed any shortcomings. It had an arduous task in attempting to make mummies scary or relevant in front of it, and instead sidestepped that endeavor at the risk of alienating fans of both horror and the iconic monster, finding an identity for itself that struck gold at just the right time. In the end, and to bring this full circle, remakes by their very nature won't please everyone, and maybe that's a good thing. Had The Mummy tried to be a straight horror film, we could have wound up with a forgettable product like 2011 The Wolfman or 2014 Dracula Untold. It took what we knew and completely rebuilt the whole concept from the ground up, maybe not giving us the horror yarn we expected, but giving us the adventure film we didn't know we wanted, one that has aged well. Its characters and imagery and snappy dialogue just as memorable and satisfying today as they were back in 1999. It strove to stand on its own 2 legs rather than on the shoulders of its predecessor. And in a time when an increasing number of remakes seemingly exist solely to try and recapture magic for a buck only to wildly miss the mark, The Mummy deserves a lot of credit for going against expectations and getting it right.